Happy Chinese New Year. Today's the
Nice.
Chinese New Year.
Oh, Happy New Year to you, Sophia. Very Happy New Year. What year is it, by the way? I know it was the year of the dragon that we've just been through.
Yeah, this is the year of the snake.
This is the year of
Snake, yeah.
the snake.
Which,
I'm told that women born in that this is associated with beauty. Is this true?
probably there's a lot of saying,
Probably. Lots
yeah.
of stories. A British friend of mine who was actually a very beautiful woman. Anyway, she proudly told me once that she was born in the year of the snake, which is why she was so
Well,
beautiful.
yeah, I think my mother's beautiful. She's born in the year of the snake. Well, so there may be some truth to it. Maybe.
Well, there you go. There may be some truth to it. Well,
Yeah.
there you go. Gosh. I love the picture behind you, by the way. Is that snow? Is that
Yeah.
snow on the
On the tree,
branches?
yes.
No.
It is in my neighborhood.
I remember it's in your neighborhood. But I
Uh-huh.
remember reading in English translation, of course, a Chinese poem, which is about snow. And the English commentator, who was, somebody who was serious about a serious Chinese scholar, was saying how in poetry, in Chinese poetry, snow, the moon, and jade are all related to each other because they have the same kind of shine,
Uh-huh.
which is
I
quite
think so.
interesting.
Yeah. I think that's true. Yeah.
Mm.
See, China has so much things to learn that I don't know everything, so
Yeah.
so and the poetry has long history, and then also different period that they have their distinctive characters. Yeah, and then of course different region of China. The sceneries are different, and then the culture and the eating habit, everything is different. So the literature coming out of different region are also different as well, Don't you think China, I mean, maybe the East observing nature a lot more than the West. West, right? West very much
They do.
West observing events more than the nature, the standstill nature, I find. So
You are completely right about this. Now, Chinese poetry I can't access because translations in English are very inadequate. It's been explained to me many times. But Chinese painting, you can absolutely see that nobody understands and has a sense of nature the way the Chinese people do.
In fact, I think there's some parts of China, your first-born child, you cannot even call that child the oldest one. They normally call that the second oldest because the first oldest should be a tree or even like a tiger, something in the nature. So it's to show the respect to the nature. We are the second,
Right.
So not everywhere,
Right.
but parts of China has that tradition. I find it very interesting.
The Deepseek is an astonishing story. Anyway, we'll get to it.
Yeah, I actually want to start by that because just this morning I read that Alibaba.
It's the biggest news of the week and perhaps even of the year.
Yeah. And because just like yesterday or maybe just a few hours ago, Alibaba also launched its own AI model, which they claim, I mean, some people claim is even better than the Deepseek one. So we need to we need to talk about that. I want to say that. So I feel like there's a panic going on, right? That we didn't see in the past, whether it's Huawei, whether it's TikTok. There's not the degree, not even close to the degree of panic going on from Silicon Valley to Wall Street. So, what's the reason for the panic? Let's go. I mean, there are many reasons. We can go through it one by one. So, the first one. Now, isn't in 2017, Putin said, whoever reaches a breakthrough in developing artificial intelligence will come to dominate the world. So considering Deepseek is a company, a small company, just like established less than 2 years old, and they used a fraction of the cost, spend less than half of the time, and created an AI model that many say is better than the latest ChatGPT model, and it's free and open source. So that to me is a huge breakthrough. So is that the number one reason that they are panicking?
Well, it is the number one reason, but of course, I'm glad you brought up what Putin said, because of course it always goes back to that topic that we've discussed many times in many programs, which is that in the West, and for these purposes, again, you see with Putin's words, Russia is a part of the West. It is always about power. So the Americans have this conception, developed this conception that AI is going to be the mechanism that they're going to secure their power, and that through AI, they will continue and extend their domination of the world. They've also got this belief, which is very, very core to the way the Americans think about themselves, that whatever happens technologically, they are always ahead of everyone else. they are, the world's supreme scientific technological power. And so they've looked at the situation in the world today. They understand that in manufacturing, China has overtaken them. And they don't really believe that they will ever win that lead back. I mean, the distance is just too great to catch up and overtake China again. And in fact, with every year, it has been growing. But they've been saying to themselves, well, this isn't actually so important because we still have this lead, which is inherent to ourselves because we are the best, the cleverest, the superior people. We will have this lead in science and in technology. We will always be able to outperform the Chinese, who are fundamentally a primitive people who simply copy everything we do. And for that reason, we will always be 5 steps ahead of them, and they will never really catch us up. And of course, they decided that AI was the way forward, and they invested billions in it, and they came up with all kinds of complicated ways to achieve it, and they built huge companies around it, and they created these elaborate stock market valuations on top of it. And then along comes China, and it quietly produces its own AI program or whatever it is. I mean, I'm not able to say app or whatever you want to call it in record time. I understand 1/20th of the price, and it works as well. So, this shocks Americans. Firstly, it shocks their business model, because their business model is based on vast resources, massively deployed in order to achieve this objective. Secondly, it shocks their own conception of themselves, that they are always the pioneers, that they are always the people who are going to forge forward and come up with these new technologies. And last but not least, of course, it shakes their own self-belief in their own power, because it turns out that at that which they thought they were best, the Chinese are even better. So you can see why it has caused this shock. Now, anybody who's actually followed the history of the last 80 years knows that this American belief, which is invincible, by the way, the Americans always persuade themselves that this is true, that this American belief that they are streets ahead of everyone else in technology and science is absolutely wrong. It has no basis. I mean, the first artificial satellite was launched by the Soviet Union, by the Russians, not by the United States. Hypersonic weapons were developed by the Russians, not by the United States. All kinds of things. Electric vehicles, the Chinese are better at them than the Americans are. But always, every couple of years, the Americans come back and tell themselves the same story, that they are ahead, that they are the most advanced. And it is true that until fairly recently, because America was so much richer than every other country, including the Soviet Union, and could draw on resources on a far bigger scale than anyone else, even if they didn't invent the technology first, they were always the first who could develop it to its full level. The trouble is And this is what I think ultimately spooks them about China. They're up against China, which has the same or even greater resources than they do themselves now, which is something they are not used to, and which uses them efficiently. And why does China use them efficiently? Because China has not, for the last 100 years, been the world's richest country, able to throw resources at every problem. It is a country that has risen to where it has through very, very hard work and very, very hard ingenuity. And it is well adapted to making more with less, which is something the Americans will never learn. This whole episode has gone directly to American insecurities and their greatest fears about themselves.
But lots of people in China actually thank the US for their sanctions. You see, part of the things is they have to, the Chinese AI companies, they have to use inferior chips because of the sanctions. They don't have access to the highest, most expensive chips. So that's, I think, the other thing that they shocked by it, but that China could do it with whatever whatever they have. So, and I wonder, there could be, I think there's another reason, which is these oligarchies themselves, the tech executives, Zuckerberg and Sam Altman, these people, they all have very big egos. I think, do you think that they feel like this AI thing is so, requires huge amount of investment and is so complicated technically, and so they feel like we are, superior people, we're better than everybody else, and that's why it justifies their amount of wealth. But now it seems like they're not that good, right? It's not that high end, that unachievable, that you have to limit it to just this very small club. There's really just a few companies in there in this AI sphere, because regular people cannot get into it. It's a high barrier to entry. You think that's also part of it, that they insecure?
Absolutely, it is. Before I discuss that, can I just quickly get onto the subject of chips? Now, about a year ago, I read because the Russians have their own industrial plan about getting to the point where they can produce their own advanced chips comparable to those that Taiwan makes. And it is a typical example of Russian industrial planning. By the way, it is extremely well organized and thorough. And Rosatom, the Russian nuclear power engineering company, is the leader in it. Well, they believe that they will have drawn level with Taiwan in chip production by the early 2030s. They believe that China will do so in about 2 years. So in 2 years' time, at most, and I think that might even be an understatement. The point is that the Chinese, who have all these skills and are having to make do with the inferior chips at the moment, will have the superior chips too, because they've already shown they can produce superior chips using existing lithography machines, but they'll be able to do that fairly soon because they're working on developing their own lithography machines. And I again, this Russian study actually explained what the Chinese are doing to develop their own lithography machines. The works that they're doing on optics and mirrors. And by the way, the Russians are partly involved in some of that work too. Most of it is Chinese. But anyway, the point is they will get there, and they will get there very soon. So they're developing the architecture for AI on inferior chips, but very soon they will have the best chips. And everybody knows this. I mean, so you can only slow the Chinese down a little, except that you're not really slowing them down. You're actually making them even more advanced, because they have to overcome every barrier that you put in their place, as well as proceed on their own, momentum. So this is the thing. And I think this is, to some extent, I think, understood even in the West, that it's only a question of time before China makes its own lithography machines. The Russians, by the way, have begun building lithography machines. They're not the most advanced ones with, the ultra, things, but they've actually started doing that now. And the China began making lithography machines a while back and is producing much more advanced ones. Just say. So that's what I wanted to say about this. Now, about the vast egos, the masters of the universe that these people believe themselves to be, the Zuckerbergs, the Musks, and all of the others, the Cooks, all of them. You are absolutely right. You only have to look at these people, the way they strut and swagger and believe themselves to be geniuses, to understand that this is a ludicrous, inflated psychic bubble that they have created around themselves. So here comes China and it pricks that. And of course there's panic. It goes again to the roots of the conception that these people have of themselves. And as you rightly say, how else do they justify the hundreds of billions of dollars each of them is worth? They have to tell themselves that they're actually a lot better than other people, and that they are the masters, that they have not only they understand the technology, but they have the resources to make the technology work. And here comes a small Chinese finance company, because that is what it does. I mean, the company that is behind this deep cheek or whatever it was called, I can't remember. Apparently its original work was in heavy financial data analysis. I mean, it was not even properly speaking a technology company. But they've got the mathematicians, they can draw on the resources, they can draw on the huge Chinese ecosystem of laboratories and scientists and universities and things of that kind, and they're able to do it. And that again shocks the Zuckerbergs and the Cooks and the Musks and all of them, and tells them that at the end of the day they're just frauds, which is basically what they are.
Yes, the remarkable, there are several remarkable things about this company. One is that it's pretty much, I would say, 99% of their employees, they have only like 150 employees. And just one or two of them probably got a degree from overseas. The rest of them are all Chinese homegrown talents. So that's one thing that lots of
how dare they get homegrown degrees instead of studying in Harvard and Yale. I mean, we can't even give ourselves the bad excuse that we train these people.
Yeah, and in terms of the lithography machine, you're right. China is building it their own, and I think even the Dutch know that. Recently, the Chinese Vice Prime Minister Ding Xuexiang, he visited the Netherlands, and the Dutch Prime Minister was talking to him, and he said, "Okay, we want to have our own, we want to decide, our policies in terms of who to sell." So it sounds like he knows if he doesn't sell now, he probably won't be able to sell, in the future. That's how.
He's absolutely right, because in 5 years' time, when China is producing these things in industrial numbers and at prices that the Dutch cannot match, the Netherlands is going to be nowhere in terms of lithography machines. But that's a done thing. Even if the Dutch wanted to sell these things to China, they can't, because they're bound by American intellectual property agreements, because they use science developed in the United States. The US gave the Dutch a lot of the science and technology and the helping hands to build these lithography machines, because the Dutch could source optics and things like that in Europe, which would have been more difficult for the Americans to do. And that was why it was done that way. But they are not an independent player, and they know it.
One more aspect of it, related to all we're saying. So Ryan Groom from Intercept, he actually said something interesting on TikTok. I saw He said that these tech executives, the big techs, they had he thinks they had a social contract with the US government, which is the US government saying, all right, you guys, I will make you unfathomably rich. In return, you are going to guarantee that the dominance of the US tech industry will be dominant to the world. And what happens is they have been kept the first part of it, which they are all extremely wealthy. But they didn't, with the Deepseek, it seems like they failed to deliver the second part, which is the dominance of the US tech. I think that's a pretty good summary, isn't it?
It's an exactly correct summary. I think that is precisely true. I mean, all of these people. I mean, Elon Musk confirmed I won't say my presence because it was a virtual discussion that I participated in, but he confirmed in my presence, in this discussion which I was involved in, that that he's in regular contact with the US government, with the US intelligence people. So there it is. I think that is exactly correct. I mean, they were given all the help they needed, basically, to set up their own companies, to develop social media. It was always well understood that they would ensure that the United States would preserve indefinite scientific and technological dominance. And bear in mind, the US surveillance state revolves around this, and the US influence state revolves around this. I mean, they need all of these social media platforms to be able to spread messages to their agents in Hong Kong and those places. Just say. So, you can understand why for them it is so massively important. And you can understand the nature of the bargain that was done. But of course, they cannot keep the bargain, because even if these people were geniuses, every American genius, there will be another one in China. Bound to be. Anybody who thinks otherwise is a fool. There are many more Chinese than there are Americans. China is a highly educated society, as we've discussed in previous programs. It has a long, long history of excellence in science and technology, and it has resources that are even greater than those of the United States. Of course, if you reduce everything to a zero-sum power battle, that is a matter of concern. If you think otherwise and say to yourself, well, isn't this a wonderful thing that this country's coming up with all these ideas and inventions, and let's see how we can use them to improve ourselves, then it's not a worrying thing. But as we've discussed in many programs now, Westerners always axiomatically think the first way.
Yeah, in fact, there are people pointed out that lots of even in the US, the AI talents, many of them actually are Chinese Americans. So some people are saying it's the Chinese in China versus the Chinese in the US. So, but still, I mean, what happened is still a little bit strange to me, because they have a limited supply of money, and the US does have access to top talents. But still, it seems like they are so way off compared to, two approaches, it seems like. So what happened? They're just too comfortable.
Well, I come back to that original point that the Americans, because they're very, very resource rich and always have been, they tend to take very big, expensive, complicated ways through a problem. There's that famous story, which is not completely true, but has an element of truth in it, that when the Russians and the Americans in the 70s did a joint space program, the Americans had this enormously expensive pen that had been developed at millions of dollars to be able to write in space, and the Russians used a pencil, which they just bought off. So it's not actually completely true. I mean, but there is. I mean, certainly, if you're talking about Apollo Soyuz, which I remember, it was the contrast with the American navigation systems, which were all digital at that time, very advanced and enormously expensive, and the Russian system, which is basically a revolving globe, which just moved around, which worked perfectly well, by the way. I mean, that was true. But this is the way the Americans do everything. I've worked with Americans, by the way. I've worked with American legal companies. And the thing about them is that it is a very, very resource expensive model. It is not designed to do things in a simple and straightforward and cost-effective way. That isn't the way America is. It never has been, not in modern times.
And the other thing is there's also some philosophical differences. So if you look at TikTok versus Facebook, for example, the algorithm are very different, people are saying. So there is this technical part of it. But actually, if you look at how they use the data, they're also very different. Facebook, their model is, okay, if you advertiser pays me more, I'll push your ads a lot. Whereas TikTok is much more focusing on me, like they trying to understand me. So they push ads and the different videos, the different channels to me based on they believe what would be interesting to me. So you see, with the same information about me, they use their data very differently.
Yes.
So that's I think, fundamentally different also. The philosophical thinking about this is different.
That's very, I did not know, but again, it doesn't surprise me. And I'm going to suggest again, as somebody who's read a certain amount of Chinese philosophy, I'm not going to pretend I know it very much, but it is very human-centered. Whereas if you're talking about the US, they take a very profit-centered approach to practically everything, basically. So I can understand that distinction exists, actually.
One more thing you might find interesting, and even your wife Catherine might find interesting. So this guy, David Holtz, who is also a young AI person. So in his X, this is what he said. He said, in my testing, Deepseek crushes Western models on ancient Chinese philosophy and literature, while also having a much stronger command on English than my first-hand Chinese sources. It feels like a communing with literary, historical, philosophical knowledge across generations that I never had access to before. It's quite emotionally moving. It makes sense too. Western labs don't have training on Chinese data, but Chinese labs train on both. Remember that China has several thousand years more of a literary history than the West does. Basically, our AI models are missing the literary foundations of Western thought, but the Chinese models have theirs intact. This could be both a classical data advantage and a less obvious advantage for spiritual and philosophical self-actualization.
What a very, very interesting set of comments. Again, it doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me at all. By the way, and for the record, I remember reading somewhere long ago that if you're looking at all things that were published, all literary works that were published before 1800, I mean, I think the Chinese published about 5 times more than everyone else combined, just say, including all of Europe up to that time.
Yeah, the China has a long tradition to preserve history and literature.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, in history, which of course is what I know, as I've said many times on our programs, no country has records that are as detailed and as thorough and go back as far as China does. None, absolutely none.
Turns out to be a good habit.
No, you.
So what is the reaction also interesting? On the one hand, Trump is saying, okay, this should be a wake-up call. So even he's commenting on that, and then lots of people are saying, okay, this is a Sputnik moment.
Yeah.
At the same time, I just read that this morning, so White House is looking into national security implications of Deepseek. So what is going to be? Are they going to continue the route of, okay, it's national security, and ban it? And is that what they're going to do?
Of course, that's what they're going to do. I mean, actually, if you think about what Trump said and what they're going to do, what the fact that they're already looking at the national security implications, they're not in conflict. When he says it's a wake-up call, I mean, you could suggest that means it's a wake-up, there's a real threat coming here. And this is, again, where we come back to the point about threat, that the Americans will see this as a threat, certainly as a challenge to their own supremacy, and one which must be surpassed and beaten down in some fashion. But they will also see it as a threat, because for them, everything ultimately comes down to a question of power. And the fact that this challenge has come from China, and I've told you many times in many programs that for the Americans, China is an obsession now. That's going to ring the alarm bells even further.
Well, so they're throwing out this free market thing, three out of the window now. Remember Thatcher, Reagan, they were talking so much about free market. So now the US government seems to me is disrupting the market in a major way when they sanction this, sanction that, and building, banning this and that. It's major disruption of the market, isn't it? The free market.
It's a complete repudiation of the free market, because, of course, the free market was fine provided the Americans dominated it. Now that it's not dominated by the US in the same way, obviously it becomes a threat. So you have to, of course, you don't say that you're against the free market. You say that you want a fair market. But of course, a fair market, by definition, is one which is only fair because you control it. I mean, this is the kind of slippery language that we are. And what is so strange about it is that lots of people who are Americans get sucked into all of this, and they start believing in it as well. And they all tell each other, the reason, our factory next door closed down was because the Chinese are doing something bad. Because, if the Chinese are going ahead with AI, it's because they stole it from us. Yeah. Trump even said the other day the Russians are ahead in hypersonics because they stole it under Obama's time. So unfortunately, there are people in the US who really do fall for this kind of thing. But you're absolutely right. It is disrupting world trade, free markets, and those kind of things. And that's why we have BRICS. That's why we have the Belt and Road. That is why, even as the Financial Times itself admitted in a long, long article it published the other day, more and more countries around the world are coming to the conclusion that the only way to cope with this is to try to trade less with the United States and to trade more with each other.
Yeah. The Chinese government actually encourages competitions. And that's including competitions from the US, Tesla, for example.
Yeah.
And people always say, okay, why do you ban Facebook? Actually, China didn't ban Facebook. Facebook, Google, even X. Elon Musk the other day was complaining, saying, X is not in China. Well, he forget X, when it was Twitter, it was in China. They left because they don't comply. They refuse to comply with the Chinese law. Yeah. So there were a whole bunch of WhatsApp, Snapchat, Reddit. They were all in China. And then left saying, okay, there's too much censorship, you're not free, blah, blah. So they left themselves. Yeah. So in other words, China has not banned any company. It just, if you come to China to our country, you need to follow the rules and laws, which of course any country would do that.
Well, as we see the United States does. Ask Huawei and TikTok.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But I just don't think it's going to work. One thing that lots of people don't understand is that in China, because it's so competitive, anything you look, there's always multiple players. Like people only know the Huawei phones, but there are actual Oppo, there's Xiaomi, there's Vivo. They're all very good. And then if you look at EVs, there's BYD, but then there's also Neta, there's a Leap Motor, etc. Right now we look at AI, it's Deepseek, but Alibaba have something coming, and there will be more coming.
Of course there will.
I just don't think they can ban their way out of this now. Are they going to build a firewall?
Well, that they can't ban their way out of it. I mean, it is what they're doing ultimately is they're isolating themselves, because everybody around the world, everyone else says, why should we buy dangerous, inferior American products which can be used to blow up people? We discussed this with the pager incident in Gaza, in Lebanon. We can be used to blow up people or spy on people, which are expensive and not always particularly reliable, by the way. Why not go for the cheaper, simpler, better designed, constantly evolving, endlessly improving products from China, which are increasingly on offer. And of course, that's exactly what's going to happen. I mean, the way to compete with China is to produce better.
Yeah.
That that if you retreat behind barriers and tell yourself all the time that your ideas are being stolen by someone else, then what you are doing is you are condemning yourself to technological backwardness, as the Chinese people themselves fully know, fully understand from their own history. By the way, speaking of which, one or two of my Russian friends said the Deepseek is already all over the place in Russia. They're all busy uploading it there, the app there, and they find it very good. Just saying.
The former Greek finance minister Yanis Varoufakis, he used this term techno-feudalism.
Yeah.
Now I find that's a very interesting term. So techno-feudalism is different from tech oligarchy. So oligarchy is somebody who has maybe 2-3 players in a particular product. They control a particular market, right? And so you can choose just between 2-3 options. So let's say I don't know, milk, right? The 2-3 brands. So the price is pretty much fixed because of the oligarchy controlling thing. Feudalism is worse in the sense that the techno-feudalism, they actually control the social network platforms, which in many cases are people's livelihood. It's not just that you can choose or not to choose. People's livelihood is relying on that. For example, YouTube, for example, right? And not just YouTube, like PayPal, people using that. And PayPal was, and I think they might still do it in the future, frozen people's bank account. I mean, their account, PayPal account. And so they cannot access the PayPal. And then their whoever wants to pay them cannot pay them. And of course, the money already in there. And I remember also GoFundMe, right? GoFundMe, the protest in Canada, they had some fund in GoFundMe, and over $1 million, the truckers, and GoFundMe just frozen that asset, and just like that, they don't even need court order. So the techno-feudalism in some ways is almost worse than the oligarchy. But what I was discussing this with my husband this morning, he said, well, right now the US has both feudalism plus oligarchy.
Yeah, it does. Well, it does, because of course what you have are kind of like huge feudal domains that are controlled by, call them barons or oligarchs, if you like. But I mean, they run these things essentially as completely in a completely arbitrary, autocratic way, and there is absolutely no right of appeal with them. So you are tied into this. I completely understand Varoufakis' comment, by the way. I think he's absolutely right. I mean, it is a kind of feudal system, one in which, as with the old feudal systems, there is no escape from it, because feudal systems are by definition closed systems, and there are no mechanisms of appeal, because the person who wields power over you has absolute arbitrary power. And it is a major regressive step as compared with what we experienced previously. So,
I do find it's incredible that banks, they cannot just close your account without court order, but these companies can. PayPal can, Venmo can, and GoFundMe, they can all just close their account without the court order. I find that's
it is absolute arbitrary. It is absolute arbitrary power.
The other thing is because they're also oligarchy, so they control the Congress, right? They have so the Congress will not put into law to put some limit on this, right? So it's a combination of both, right? The monopoly, and the techno-feudalism,
absolutely.
Another question is, what happened to Europe? When I think about it, in the beginning of the early stage of the internet, Europe had quite a few interesting things coming from Europe. So like Tim Berners-Lee, he's from Britain, right? He's the one supposed to invented the World Wide Web. Linus, who developed Linux, he's from Finland. And then Marcus Persson also from I think he's from Sweden. He did the Minecraft. So they are and then there's Skype, there's Spotify. They all coming from Europe. But then it seems like they didn't do anything with the social network platform thing. And
Yeah.
now the AI. I think France had just taken offline their AI chatbot after just a few days. It was just so bad. The answer was so
Yeah.
bad, so they pull it off. So what happened to Europe? They have nothing to show for.
This is an extraordinary fact, and it really begs the question about the critical quality of economic governance that we have in Europe. Only one European country has developed a complete architecture on, in social media and has active AI programs, and that's Russia. I mean, Russia has its equivalents to all of the social media platforms that we've been talking about as a very active community of social. I mean, it's obviously on a much smaller scale than the American and the Chinese one, but it does exist and it's very vibrant and it's developing and it's growing all the time. And you have Russian platforms like Telegram, some of which have had an international reach. But no European country has been able to do that. Not Germany, which you would have thought had the technological depth to be able to create something like that, nor Britain, which has the ability, the mathematical skills and the English language, not France, which also has mathematical skills. And there are, I am sure, many, many explanations for this. Something wrong with the economic ecosystem in Europe. But I'm not able to provide a simple explanation as to why this is so. It's very difficult to understand why in Europe we have failed so completely. I mean, the excuse that's given is that, these are fragmented societies, Germany, France, Britain by themselves. Britain, obviously, the problem in Britain is that any British social media platform has to compete with the American ones. And because we have the same language, that is very, very difficult. But I would have thought there's enough people in Germany to create a market for a German social media platform. And in France as well, with, the French, lots of people around the world speak French. Why there has been this total failure, it does beg many, many questions. And I have no explanation. I don't have a simple explanation for it, whether it's something to do with the way our financial system works, whether there's problems at the university level so that these things don't develop there, whether it's because capital formation is poor here, why it should be more successful in that case in Russia, who knows? But it is a fact that we've never really succeeded in doing this in Europe. And in fact, we're falling ever further behind.
Isn't that what European Union is for? For things like that to, because you have all the kind of central power, central control. That's where you should put in your resource and to get everybody together, do something policy-wise, budget-wise, those sort of thing to help lead the different countries and maybe even divide different works. And I don't know. That's where European Union should be a good place to do these things. But they're not doing anything. Right.
What you've just said is, for me personally, very sad, because that is why I used to support the European Union and the European community. I mean, once upon a time, I used to argue that and not just me, I mean, it was a common argument that you heard many people say, that because our economies were relatively small, well, not small, but I mean, we're not, comparable to the United States or even, Russia or wherever, China, that in order to succeed in things that require big scale, we need to pool resources and to organize, continental scales and things. But it's never really worked that way. And I agree. That is what the European Union should be about, but it doesn't seem to know how to do it. And my brother and my niece both of whom have worked at various times in the European Commission, tell me that the European bureaucracies are simply not able to think in these terms. They don't have that kind of interest even in these sort of projects. Once upon a time, way back in the 1970s, there was an attempt to set up a pan-European industrial program, which was Airbus, and France led on it.
Yeah.
And for a time, it was successful, though I understand that things are not fully well in the Airbus family either anywhere more. It may look good by comparison with Boeing, but in fact, the problems are starting to build up there too. But, you know, that which I think many people had expected would be, you know, the first big step towards some kind of big industrial technological science strategy across Europe. It's never worked out that way. By the way, I should say that if you go all the way back to the 1950s, when the European Union was first being created, one of the core component parts of what became the European Union, which still exists today, by the way, was Euratom. And the idea was, this is the 1950s, everybody was very keen on nuclear power. It was assumed it would be the energy of the future. It was expected that Europe would work together, all of the states of Europe would work together to create a unified nuclear power system with nuclear reactors and more advanced technologies, and important laboratories were set up like CERN to move it forward. And even that didn't quite work out. So as I said, why we failed and failed so completely, as I said, there must be explanations, deeper explanations, and they're probably cultural ones in some way, but it's a fact. And one would like to be proper academic and intellectual studies of this, but there never are.
Could it be? I'm just as an observer. Could it be?
No.
Europe is focusing too much on containing Russia.
Yeah.
they don't focusing on that important things to do.
Well, I mean, you are absolutely correct about this. I mean, this has now become the overriding obsession and focus of this. And of course, the other thing is that Europe, because of the way it's structured, and this is the other story. I mean, you know, it is very, very susceptible to lobbies. So we have very powerful green lobby, for example, in Europe, which has played an outsized influence in developing energy policy. Now, the point is that this isn't integrated properly, as it is in China, for example, into a proper economic system. So you don't have a situation where in China they say, look, we need to move towards a more, if you like, green energy future. So what do we need to do in order to achieve that? And at the same time, to move forward and improve technology and productivity and the material and other conditions of life of our people. They don't do this in Europe. So you get all kinds of people who want to build windmills here and solar panels there, and everything happens in a completely confused and uncoordinated way, with sort of cottage industries emerging that just don't function on an industrial scale. Every couple of years, by the way, you get someone in Europe who say, we've got a problem. And they're commissioned to do a big report, and they come up with this enormous report. Mario Draghi is the latest example. And then you read it, and you realize as soon as you read it that it's not going to work because the actual details are not there. You remember I was telling you about how the Russians have the program to make chips, advanced chips by the early 20s, to draw level in chip production on the early 2030s. As I said, I've read through the whole planning document. Only, I mean, first of all, it's hundreds of pages long, and it goes into enormous detail about how it's to be done, and step by step, and stage by stage, and it understands that you can't do everything in a day, and it goes through all that kind of detail. And I am sure that in China you do that even more.
Yeah.
You never see anything like that in Europe.
I feel like Europe still, even though it has been, become a European Union for a while, for, I don't know, 20, 30 years now, it's still not really grasp how to run Europe.
No.
I feel like they go with the easy. The easy is there's enemy. Russia's the enemy. So let's all, go against Russia. That seems like the easy way for them to combine everybody and pay attention there, rather than looking at the details of each country and how to better coordinate together and how to, delegate different tasks and stuff and planning, of course, and all these things. They don't seem to know how to do that. Instead, they just know, let's go against Russia. That seems, is that part of
I think this is absolutely correct. I mean, I think this has now become and of course, the worse the situation it becomes in Europe, the more that imperative seems to become even more important. It's very strange. I mean, we have a deepening economic crisis right across Europe, and the solution is more war with Russia. I mean, that seems to be the kind of explanation. But wars can sometimes, I mean, I don't say this with any pleasure, but it's historically fact that wars can sometimes actually be galvanizing events. They can actually enable you to think through industrial problems and to say to yourself, I mean, the Russians are doing this at the moment. I mean, they went from a situation a few years ago when they were nowhere in drones to a position today when they are one of the most advanced countries in terms of drones. And they've had a whole series of big industrial planning meetings over the last couple of days saying how they're going to take this even further, because this is now seen not just as a in military industrial thing, but as a civilian economy thing also. But that never happens in Europe. It's as if everything limits itself to the level of rhetoric in the end. It's very strange. It's very painful to me, because I remember my hopes of the past, which always were focused, by the way, on a peaceful Europe, trading, building up its industries, developing its science, and doing those kind of things. And seeing the Europe that we see today it's upsetting, actually.
Yeah, they just should, stop worrying about China. I mean, worry about China, Russia, or anybody, focusing on themselves. That's, I think, the step number one. I think.
Absolutely agree. Totally agree.
Yeah. So now Trump has become like a president for almost 10 days now. What is your preliminary assessment of, he has been signing all kinds of executive orders, and what is your so far assessment about his presidency?
A tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. I mean, we've had a huge amount of activity, which many people are mistaking for action. There has actually been very little real action at all. Now, you can excuse that, you can forgive that, because this is the first week, and a lot of the things that he's been doing are I think, intended to be symbolic. No woke, no woke, things of scrapping the Green New Deal and all of those kind of things. So you can understand why that's happened, but so far, in terms of an actual program of action, an approach to take the United States forward over the next 4 years, I haven't really seen anything. I mean, even the tariffs are being talked about rather than introduced. And notice that just saying, on the diplomatic front, no movement so far at all on Ukraine.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
Putin and Trump haven't spoken.
Mm-hmm.
The Russians are saying they're still waiting to hear from the
Mm-hmm.
Americans. The Americans are all over the place. Kellogg hasn't been to Moscow. There's no ideas, no plan. An absurd post on Truth Social, which caused a lot of offense in Russia by suggesting that the Russians helped the Americans win the Second World War. So offensive to the Russians, by the way, and such a contrast to the way that the Chinese and the Russians are preparing to celebrate their joint victory this year. Just saying. So, at the moment, I'm just waiting to see what eventually he's going to do. I mean, he gives speeches, he gives interviews, he's talking altogether too much.
Yeah.
But what he's going to do, I'm not sure. And I'm beginning to wonder that really on many things, there really isn't any kind of plan.
Yeah, that's how I feel also, and it's not clear to me exactly what he's going to do with, relationship with China. Probably the most important bilateral relationship nowadays, right? I don't see anything. And like you said, I was going to ask you what exactly Trump's going to do about Ukraine. It's not clear to me. But he did sign a executive order to release the files for JFK assassination, RFK, and Martin Luther King Jr. But the strange thing is he's not saying just release everything immediately. He's giving them 15 days and then 45 days for the other two to come up with a plan. Why is that? Is he giving them time, the security agencies, the time to destroy things?
Well, exactly. Exactly. I mean, like so much else that you're constantly promised is going to happen, when the moment for delivery comes, it proves to be less impressive than one was led to expect. I mean, I'd understood that he was going to come along and sign this off, and we'd have all the documents out there now and at once. And I accept there's still a few people left over from 1963. It cannot be many now, but there are probably a few people, who were sources inside the Cuban government at that time, and maybe their families and all that. But I mean, this is basically history by now. And if you're dealing with individual cases, I mean, you don't need 15 days. It's going to be prepared well in advance. This doesn't make any sense. And it again suggests that really, whatever it is that they don't want us to see in these documents is going to remain unseen.
They're going to, again, I mean, for the release of documents, there's still a lot of redacted, so
absolutely
they can say everything is released, but yeah. And the other thing is,
one wonders how long this has to go on for, actually. I mean, really.
Yeah. I also started to believe that we will never know the true facts.
No.
I mean, we can know more or less what happened, but not exactly down to individuals, timelines and those sort of things, exactly what happened. I think we will never find out.
No.
Yeah. And the other thing is he talked about this AI project, the 500 billion is going to put in place. Now, of course, with the Deepseek, now people are questioning, do you really need that kind of investment? I mean, actually, from the beginning, I wondered whether that's a kind of a money grabbing thing. They always do that, don't they? Money laundering.
Well, of course they do. Do you remember the CHIPS Act? Which is going to transform the chip industry in the United States. I mean, how much money did Biden throw at, was it Intel, in order to get all those sophisticated chips and all those factories set up in the US? There isn't a single factory. They didn't produce a single factory. They put an awful lot of money. It supported Intel for a time. Intel did quite good out of it. But did it actually result in anything? The answer is no. And again, you remember what I was saying to you, that the Europeans they don't seem to understand what a challenging thing industrial planning is. You have to think it through. You have to ask yourself, what are the problems? Where are the supply bottlenecks? What are the technologies? What do you need to break down and work out? Which, as I said, that Russian program on chips has done. and I am absolutely sure, if I'd gone back 20 years' time and seen the original planning documents that existed in Beijing on developing the EV cars then, it wouldn't have been hundreds of pages long. They would have been tens of thousands of pages long, incredibly detailed, and various, laboratories and scientific institutions and university science departments probably asked to contribute, and all kinds of things. So everything is worked out. And all the various, I don't know whether you call them provinces. We call them provinces. The regions in China. The governments there would have all been involved. You never get anything like that in the United States anymore. Donald Trump says, "I'm going to allocate $500 billion to developing AI." A huge amount of money is allocated. This appears to be plucked out of nowhere. There's no evidence that this has really been designed. You don't look at this, come up with the costing, work out a detailed budget, do any of that kind of thing. You just come up with a figure. You say, I'm getting, which looks big. You say $500 billion, and you expect AI to come out the other end. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah, Donald Trump is too much showmanship. I think it's not much substance. Yeah,
you can say that about Trump, and it's true, by the way. But who else is better? I mean, this is. I mean, the only person in the US today who does seem to have a genuine sense of industrial planning is Elon Musk. Whatever you may think about him, I mean, he has managed things not just with cars, but with space rockets and things of that kind. But generally speaking, in the West now, in the United States, amongst governments, that kind of planning skill just doesn't seem to exist anymore.
Yeah, isn't it part of the reason there's a lot of elections going on? Everybody just thinking about 4 years.
Yeah.
Get by that 4 years, and that's it.
This is very, very true. Once upon a time, in the old days, the United States had mitigated that problem because there were lots of agencies that existed that looked beyond mere elections, and private industry in the US, which was organized on an enormous continental scale, was able to do an awful lot of this work itself, and there was the military too. But it seems that with every election cycle, those agencies for long-term planning weaken, and the result is that long-term industrial planning gets worse. We also have a problem in the West, by the way, which is that since the 70s, we've developed this economic theory that free markets should be left to themselves to decide every problem, and that way may work, in primitive economies, and it might work if you're dealing with financial engineering and things of that kind. But if you're looking at long-term science and industrial planning, as somebody who worked in industry for a time, I could say it doesn't work there. You need much longer planning horizons than you get in the markets and than you get through election cycles.
That's. What is the Keir Starmer's policy towards China? So he did meet Xi Jinping in Brazil last November. So it's not clear to me. Now you send me this link, the Financial Times article that blaming everything on China. Is that still the tune, that there's still this China bad, China, hostile towards China, or is there any shift? It's not clear to me.
I don't think there is any shift at all. Now, the article that I sent you, which is in the Financial Times, is an absolutely crazy article about TikTok somehow turning the Taiwanese people, or the young people in Taiwan, and making them more favorable to China, as if anyway, I said that was even a problem. Just say, but anyway, but that is very typical of the constant anti-Chinese propaganda that we get in Britain. That hasn't slackened. I mean, it continues at the same relentless level as always. Now, at the level of government, you have the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, who is presiding over a declining economy where Britain is probably in recession. There's a major budget crisis. The debt to GDP ratio is out of control. And the country is very, very short of investment. And Britain depends on outside investment to keep the economy running. So at some level, Starmer and his chancellor, Rachel Reeves, who, as you know, went to China a short time ago, understand that, well, how are we going to turn this round when they've come to something of the same conclusion that Cameron and Osborne did 10 years ago, that, you know, the only place really that can help us turn things around is China. So Rachel Reeves went to Beijing, but she went without any real ideas or conviction. She didn't come again to China with, you know, a plan or a roadmap saying, this is how we would like to take our relationship with you further. This is the parts of industry which I think you might be interested in, which you'd probably want to invest in. She brought mainly lawyers, by the way, with her, and finance people and that kind of thing. And of course, I think the Chinese did what they always do. They listened very politely to what she had to say, and they gave her $600 million of investment promises, which is a rounding up error, basically. And off she went, because I think it's at some level, they do understand that they need to work with China, but they don't really have any belief in it.
What happened to Britain? I mean, British people should be pretty good at doing trade. You know, your island, you know, you have the sailing around the globe. What happened to
as the Chinese people remember to their cost, if I may say, being a bit sour about this. But you're absolutely right. I mean, you know, the old Britain, which I remember, was always open for business. It always traded around the world. It had a real entrepreneurial and mercantile drive, more so, by the way, than it had an industrial one. The British were never really that good at industry, but they were very, very good at trade. And you would have thought that, you know, this is what we would be good at, best at. But we've lost those skills.
Why don't they just have some kind of a free trade agreement with China, free trade agreement with Europe, with US? You know, how about starting with there?
Well, why not indeed start with China?
Yeah.
Why not go back to what Cameron and Osborne, and Osborne was an actual businessman. I mean, he was involved in business. He has a wallpaper company, by the way, which, right, I mean, you know, I can laugh at it, but I mean, he was in trade. So, you know, why not actually start with China, which has vast amount of investment capital, would be interested in opening factories here, might be interested in opening EV factories here. Why not start there? Why not really work with them? Well, the trouble is, the moment you do that, you come up against all the elements of the British deep state, which will say, no, you can't do that. This is a danger and this is a threat. And of course, if you're talking about China, the Chinese have already been there with Osborne and Cameron. They saw what happened to Huawei in Britain. And, you know, they might not be so keen anymore as they used to be. So, I mean, an intelligent government, one that really had a proper focus on development and turning Britain round, would probably prioritize things like that. And if it did it well, it might be able to persuade people in China for this law. I mean, you know, not just Beijing. You know, you go to the provinces, you meet the industry people, you establish connections with the Chinese banks, you persuade the Chinese banks to establish branches in Britain. You know, you could do all kinds of things if you really work to do it. Of course, you have to find out what they are interested in.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just come along and say, I'd like you to open your branch in London, because they'll ask why. But I mean, if you do your work, I mean, this is hard work, but if you do your work, if you establish the proper contacts, if you do that, it might not happen. It might take 1, 2, 3, 5 years, but you can do it.
Yeah.
But no, nobody thinks like that in Britain today.
Do you know there is a province in China, Shanxi province? The Shanxi province shape very much like a Britain. So lots of people point that out. So maybe that's where they can start working with Shanxi
Well,
province.
what a good idea. What a good idea. Why not point that out? Why not establish, days in Britain of Shanxi province? Seriously. Establish contacts with local universities, between British universities and Chinese universities in this particular province.
Yeah.
I mean, again, all it requires is a certain imagination
Yeah.
and very hard work.
Yeah.
Admittedly, it does require hard work. As I said, nothing can be done easily. It can't be done quickly. But if you are really interested in developing your country, that's what you do. Starmer, Reeves, you only have to listen to them to know that they'll never do this.
Okay. Middle East. There is a ceasefire between Hamas and Israel, but is it sustainable? I mean, what's your take on that?
Well, obviously not, because what we get, I mean, first of all, I should say, I mean, the fact that there's been a ceasefire is because Israel failed militarily. They weren't able to defeat Hamas. And I think we need to say that first. But it's absolutely clear with every single passing day that the Israeli government remains as determined to annex Gaza as always, to expel the entire Gaza population, to continue the displacement of the Palestinians, to continue to seek victory, and to resettle Gaza with Israeli settlers. That remains their objective. And the American government, Donald Trump, is backing them in this. So given that this is so, there cannot be peace, because by definition, that is not a formula for peace. It is a formula for conquest. And conquest and peace are incompatible with each other.
And Trump, I think, put pressure on both Egyptian government and the Jordanian government, want them to take all the Palestinians, right? Is that his solution? Basically, help Israel for genocide. Is that?
Absolutely, that's exactly his solution, as it was, by the way, for a time Biden's solution. Again, people are not aware of this, but I followed this and discussed this at length at the time. But in the autumn of 2023, after the Israeli attack on Gaza began, the Israelis came up with exactly the same plan. And Tony Blinken visited Egypt and Jordan, trying to persuade the Egyptians and the Jordanians to agree to take the population from Gaza. And the Egyptians and the Jordanians said no. And the Egyptian president got incredibly angry and humiliated Blinken on television, and then he telephoned Biden, and there was a row, and Biden backed down and said, this isn't our policy after all. But now, of course, a new administration has come, and the Israelis are working on Trump, and he's come round and he's doing it all over again. And of course, the Jordanians and the Egyptians are saying no. So Donald Trump, being Donald Trump, he says, all right, the Egyptians and the Jordanians won't do it. Let's get the Indonesians to do it instead. And I mean, he actually did over the weekend. I mean, it really does make your head, you want to sort of...
because Indonesia is a Muslim country, so it's...
Absolutely. It's got lots of empty islands, don't you see?
Okay, that sounds like Trump, very typical Trump. Okay. The other place is Sudan that doesn't got a lot of coverage, but my understanding is there is a famine that's going on in Sudan. It's getting worse. So it goes back to Wesley Clark to talk about the 7 countries, one after another. Sudan is one of those 7 countries. So in 2011, Sudan divided. They split, right? Become 2 Sudans. And then afterwards, there seems like right now there's wars in both Sudans. What is going on there? Why is the United States interested in Sudan? I mean,
An,
destabilize Sudan.
an excellent question. I mean, when the Sudanese civil war restarted, I should say Sudan has been the subject of many civil conflicts ever since it gained its independence from Britain back in the 60s. But when the civil war restarted about 2 years ago, um, the evidence was that the Americans were unhappy because the
Mm-hmm.
Sudanese government had been thinking granting a naval base to Russia on the Red Sea. So
Oh,
that had to be stopped at all costs. And therefore they started that they got an armed faction to rebel, and that provoked the civil war there. Well, it's continued ever since. The war's got worse. As you
mm-hmm.
rightly say, we have a famine on top of it. The United States doesn't like strong countries, doesn't want Sudan to be a strong country.
Mm-hmm.
Sudan is a huge country. Potentially, it could be a rich country. It's worried that China has a presence on the Red Sea because the Chinese have a base there and all that. I mean, all that kind of nonsense and hysteria and madness. And the result is that Sudan is sacrificed to these complex geopolitical games, which the people of Sudan themselves have no interest in and don't even understand.
Now, one thing Trump did, I do find encouraging a little bit, is that he
Mm,
put a pause on all the foreign aid, including money goes
yeah,
to Ukraine and to
yeah.
Taiwan. So that's a
Yeah,
welcoming
yeah. It's a
thing.
major. It is in fact the single best thing that he has done since he became
Uh-huh.
president, and it's had a dramatic effect.
Yeah.
It's precipitating a political crisis in Kiev, which is now festering and getting worse. And apparently, we've now suddenly discovered that the United States basically funded the entire Ukrainian mass media,
Mhm.
and so they're
Yeah.
going around. All the journalists there are going around begging various other Western sponsors to give them money to keep going. So just that
Yeah.
tells you a little bit about who ran the mass media in Ukraine. But I mean, it was the best thing that he has done, and I hope he
Mhm.
sticks by it.
Yep.
And the other thing I've heard is that all of this vast apparatus of NGOs that go around the world um, orchestrating regime change in
Hmm.
many countries, they've also had their funding cut off.
Great.
We did a program with a Hungarian official
Hmm.
on the Duran, and he confirmed that the NGOs in Hungary, which have been trying to organise a colour revolution there, have now suddenly had their funding stopped, and they're in shock about it. Apparently,
Great. That's good. That's very good.
yeah, yeah.
But do you think there is a divide between the Europeans and the Trump now in terms of how to move forward with Ukraine, the
Yes,
conflict in Ukraine?
yes. I mean, I don't think that Trump has any kind of plan for
Okay.
Ukraine. I think that's become very clear now over the last week. I don't think he has any clear idea how he's going to end the war. And I think that to some extent, he's now starting to distance himself from the whole problem. But he
Hmm.
clearly has no belief in this project
Hmm.
and is looking to extricate the United States from it. That is my own sense of it.
Hmm.
Whereas the Europeans, by contrast, remain massively committed emotionally and politically to support for Ukraine. And they're very, very nervous about what is happening with Trump. And they're very, very worried that eventually the Russians and the Americans will get together and will come to some kind of an understanding without the Europeans being involved.
And there's not a whole lot information coming from the front line. I assume it's still going on and it's going badly for Ukraine. Is
It's
that?
going very, very badly for
Uh-huh.
Ukraine. And of course, a few days ago, they lost the this very important fortified town, which was Velika Yanovosilka. The reason you're hearing less about this is because, as often happens in this part of the world, there is a sudden thaw. So the temperatures went from about -10 to +20. So this has turned the entire landscape into mud. I've actually seen the pictures, and this has meant that movement has basically come to a stop.
Okay.
Next week, the temperatures will fall again to -16. The
Okay.
ground will harden and things will start to move again.
Okay. Okay. And I also think that their attention span is short. I think people lost interest for Ukraine.
I think that's true. Yeah.
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 And now they're focusing on Deepseek.
Deepseek. Yeah. The
Um,
America is much more worried about Deepseek than it is
yeah,
about Ukraine.
yeah,
I mean, Ukraine was last year's project.
yeah,
China is every year's project. Just saying.
yeah. The last thing I want to ask you is that the Trump White House actually allows social media people to join their press briefing.
Yeah.
Supposedly, you can just go to their website and do, I guess,
Yeah.
apply for the permit or
Yeah.
something. I think that would be interesting to see, isn't it? That they open.
We Alex and I have discussed actually making that application. Of course, we have a problem in that we're not based in the US, so we're not
Mhm.
able to attend the actual press pools. I don't know whether we can go there on a virtual basis. Of course, it's a challenge
Uh-huh.
because it'd be a very, very time-consuming thing.
Yeah,
But we are giving it serious thought, and it is an interesting thing.
yeah.
And I ought to say, I mean, maybe I was a bit unkind in saying that the administration has done absolutely nothing. Trump hasn't done anything. But I've noticed that suddenly, for example, you can get RT on Google in Britain, which you
Oh,
couldn't do. So all kinds of things have started to happen in that respect.
okay.
So it does look as if the censorship restrictions have been significantly eased over the last
Hmm.
week.
Hmm.
So again, I mean, let's give credit where it's due.
Yeah.
Maybe for the moment, well, I think the cutoff of funding is a big thing,
Hmm.
but maybe on the other big things, Trump hasn't yet done very much.
Yeah.
But this business of censorship is another plus that you must put on the side of his ledger, actually.
Yeah. Now, he also put a hold on the ban on TikTok, so I give him credit for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even though he repeatedly said that because he has warm heart, warm space in his heart for TikTok, he contributed that he's winning among the youth or the increase of
Yeah,
support for him
yeah,
to TikTok.
yeah,
But honestly, there's a lot of rumors about who will buy it and etc.
yeah.
Honestly, I think at this point, the best solution is just leave TikTok alone. I I,
Absolutely.
I,
Why
I
not?
don't trust anybody.
Why not? Why not leave it alone? I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, bear in mind that it was Trump who started this whole problem with TikTok in the first place in his
Yeah,
first term. So, I
yeah.
mean, it would have been far better just to have left it alone. And but anyway, they can't do that in America, or so it seems. But certainly on censorship issues,
Mm-hmm.
he is a
He's
big
better.
step
Hmm.
forward over the
Yeah.
people we had before. And the TikTok thing, as you say, is mildly encouraging. He's still trying to get an American company to buy
Uh-huh.
Google or Musk or whoever, instead of leaving a perfectly successful and very, very much liked, even loved company alone.
Yeah.
Just so.
Yeah, I mean, they don't have good record on these kind of
No,
acquisitions. Like
no,
Instagram is much better one before Zuckerberg took
absolutely,
Instagram.
completely agree. Completely
Yeah.
agree.
So why do you destroy a
Yeah,
well-functioning company?
yeah,
And not to mention, there's a lot of business rely on that, right?
yeah,
And then if that app doesn't do well, then it will hurt those
yeah.
businesses. And I
Correct.
don't think Trump can afford it because he's the president
No,
now, right? So
yeah.
why hurting so many? There are like 5 to 7 million businesses on TikTok, so it's
Exactly.
enormous.
Exactly. It's enormous. Absolutely. I would just leave it alone.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, China has TikTok. China, we're a Chinese company.
Hmm.
Chinese business people produce TikTok. They run it well. This national security thing, everybody knows it's nonsense.
Yeah.
Just relax. Let it go. That's the obvious thing to do. But Americans never listen to that kind of advice. Anyway, well, maybe we can hope. Maybe this time they will.
Well, in China, people think this has nothing to do with the privacy, has nothing to do with the national security. It's downright robbery. That's what the
Well, of course.
Chinese people
Well, of
think.
course it. Well, of course. And then entirely right. Successful Chinese company, you take control of it, as happened with Huawei. I mean,
Uh-huh.
well, ultimately, nobody was ever able to prove. Nobody even attempted to prove
Hmm.
that there was an actual national security
Yeah,
issue with Huawei.
yeah,
Nobody did.
no,
The fact was, it was moving forward on 5G. Remember 5G? How everybody
yeah.
used to talk about 5G? Nobody talks about it anymore, by the way. That suddenly all stopped being even big issue because we can't do it properly. But anyway, that's another story.
Yeah.
But nobody, and ultimately, all it was a grab to get Huawei's business, which nobody ultimately was able to do anywhere near as well as Huawei itself would have done. And Huawei, I understand, is flourishing.
Yeah.
So ultimately, it's doing really well. Going back to what we said before, this isn't injuring China. It is entrenching technological obsolescence in the West.
Yeah, Huawei is manufactured chips, and Deepseek actually said that they are using Huawei chips now. So,
well, there you go.
Okay. Well, that's all I have for now. So, thank you so much for spending the time, and we will talk next week. I'm sure there will be a bunch of topics.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Right. Bye.
Bye.